Hello all the crazy people out there, my name is Michael, I like wizards and dragons and making games, and welcome back to Getting Started Making Games in GameMaker. So in the last video, I talked about drawing text, and the different text drawing functions that GameMaker makes available to you, and different ways that you can change the look of the drawn text by doing things like setting the color or setting the font alignment. And today we're going to talk about what is probably the most obvious way that you can change the way that drawn text looks and feels, and that is going to be by talking about fonts. So if you want to set a font in drawn text in GameMaker, you actually have to go and create an entire new resource type, which we haven't looked at yet, and that is going to be fonts. So fonts in GameMaker are handled through the font resource type. So in the same way that you could add something like a sprite or a sound or an object to your game, you can also add a font to your game. And we can go and give this a name. I'm going to, by tradition, fnt underscore the underscore game underscore font. And when you open up your font in the workspace or otherwise over here on the side in your inspector, you are going to see something that looks something like this. So firstly, and most obviously, you can select your font, and by default, GameMaker will give you a list of all of the fonts installed on your system. So this is the current list of like default Windows 11 fonts. If you were to go and download a font from the internet and install it on your system, it would also appear in this list, although if you have GameMaker open while you do that, you might need to restart GameMaker so that the list is refreshed. There's also a refresh system fonts option in help, which should be able to do that for you. Anyway, I am going to go and be a rebel, and I'm going to go and set my font to Kamex Sans. Where is it in this list? Kamex Sans over here, because I think Kamex Sans is overhated and we need to stick up for each other. I'm going to make this font a little bit bigger, and I'm going to set the size to, say, 20, just so that it's, like, you don't have to squint in the YouTube video to read it. And I think we are going to start with that. So, if you want to preview your font, you can type into this window. This is just basically a notepad. Which you can type into to see what different characters look like in your font with the given settings. And I think we're going to go back to GameMaker. I'm going to get back to the rest of the settings later. So I can set my font using the draw set font, the underscore game font, in the same way that I can set the horizontal, vertical alignment, or the color of text. And now when I do this, we are going to have above the player's head, we're going to have this text drawn instead of with the GameMaker default font with the Kamex Sans font. And if we like, we can, of course, set the color to something that is not white. Set the color to... What color am I feeling? I need something that's going to be, like, legible. Unfortunately, usually the best way to do that is to be with, like, outline text or a drop shadow or something. Which is a more advanced subject that you need to use some of the more advanced font features to do. Let's set the color to green. This is going to be a dark green. Oh, wow, that's really bad. The grass is green. I probably should have thought about that. How about aqua? Which is like a light blue color. Alright, it's kind of ugly, but at least it's bright enough that you can read it against the background. Cool. So that's a basic use of a font. Do be aware that at least by default, you can't really scale up or down a font nicely and neatly at runtime in GameMaker. You might remember from the beginning of the draw text video when I discussed the artifacting that you saw when you blew up text. Basically, anytime you draw text that is not at a 1-to-1 ratio to the pixel grid of your monitor. And that is because, again, when GameMaker draws text on the screen, it is not doing any true font rendering at runtime in the way that something like a word processor might. And that is for performance reasons, because doing that at runtime is actually kind of expensive. What it does instead is, when you compile your game, GameMaker will save every character in your font, every glyph, as it were, to basically a tiny little sprite of its own, and it will just string those together. And if you scale up or scale down or transform in any other way your text, GameMaker will basically just squash and stretch those sprites, and you will start to notice sprite artifacting. You might think that the way that you want to deal with that is by checking the anti-aliasing option over here in font settings. Well, one, it's on by default, and two, that's not really what it's for. The anti-aliasing, I believe, is for when the font is rasterized when you compile your game. What you really probably want to do, and there are a couple of different ways that you can deal with this, is to check the Enable SDF option, the Enable SDF checkbox over here. And that will have GameMaker handle your font as an SDF font. So SDF stands for Signed Distance Field, and I'm not going to get too into it now, but it is a way of rendering fonts which doesn't require a proper font renderer to, like, construct each of the characters or glyphs from the mathematical points and curves that define them in a font file. But it does include a little bit of extra anti-aliasing information in the bitmap sprites when the GameMaker compiler rasterizes them when you run your game. And it does allow you to, at least within reasonable limits, it allows you to scale up and down your fonts. And at least preserve some anti-aliasing information when you do so. So let's talk about what this means. So I think I'm going to go and change my my room viewports again, so that we're going to enable the viewport, and we're going to, like, draw the whole game blown up a little bit like this, and just so that we get some extra, like, font transformation artifacts. I'm also going to blow up the drawn text itself, so draw text extended transformed, and let's go with a non-integer scaling this time. Let's say 1.5 on the X, 1.5 on the Y, and for good measure, let's rotate it at like a 10-degree angle. And this should introduce some nice, like, transformation artifacts into this drawn text, like this. Okay, this definitely, you see the individual blocky pixels in that, and it doesn't really look good. We are going to go and check the Enable SDF checkbox in our font properties. And now when I run the game, when I transform my text like this, it looks a lot smoother. You don't really see those artifacts. The signed distance field, the extra information that is encoded in the font with the signed distance field. On a technical level, GameMaker is now rendering this text with a special shader that uses that extra SDF information. And it uses that to anti-alias the font on the fly, doing things like smoothing out curves, getting rid of those ugly, weird transformation artifacts. So, because we are still not doing true font rendering, and we're just doing some anti-aliasing here, there are limits to this. So, for example, if I were to set the font size to 10, and if I were to blow it up, instead of 1.5x, if I were to blow it up to 3x, like this, we are going to see that we're going to start developing some problems, and now we don't really have what looks like the original font anymore, even though on paper, like, having the size of it and then doubling it again should be equivalent to drawing it at the size that it was the first time around. And that is because, again, GameMaker is still converting each of the glyphs in this font to a sprite, and it is just stringing together those sprites. And even with the extra anti-aliasing information that is encoded in the sprite, if you try to blow it up too much, it is just going to lose information. There just isn't enough information in the rasterized version of the font to be able to anti-alias it properly at large scales like this. So usually what you're going to want to do if you have a font which you're trying to use in this way is to set the size to something a little bit larger, say 40, and to probably still you want to avoid scaling it up to ridiculous proportions, but if you have a somewhat larger font, there is more space in each of the character sprites to encode that anti-aliasing information. And this should look a little bit better. Alright, it is huge now, but we can see that we still are anti-aliasing this text reasonably well, even though we are now scaling it up 3 times. You can also create a huge font and scale it down, and you generally can get away with doing that, again, within reason. So if I had a font of size 40, and if I were to scale it down, the signed distance field information should be enough to be able to correctly handle that. Something else you can do with signed distance field fonts. I realize SDF font sounds like a redundant acronym, but it actually isn't. Something else you can do with these is you can use this to apply various font effects such as outlines or glows or drop shadows. And that's all quite cool, but it does, to do that in GameMaker, you do need to use some of the more advanced language features, which we haven't talked about yet. You need to use structs and some other methods of data management, which I haven't gone into on video in the series yet, so I'm going to leave those for some other time. Now, let's stop being silly here, and let's go back to regular draw text, and I'm going to get rid of all of this additional nonsense that I had on the side over here. And let me talk about some of these other options that you can set with fonts. By the way, if your font does have like bold or italic or bold italic like style versions, you can set those in the style drop down over here. Some fonts have quite a lot of them, like semi-bold or condensed or different other style versions. You can set that all through this. Again, since fonts are converted to sprites or rasterized when you compile the game, you can't just change the style of a font at runtime, but you can do that through the font properties over here. So because GameMaker is going to go and render every font glyph to a sprite, or to rasterize it when you compile your game, let's talk about font ranges. So by default, fonts in GameMaker will not contain every single character that the font offers. So by default, GameMaker will only include character ranges that include the capital letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and certain punctuation marks in your font. So this is generally okay if you're writing your game in English, but there are plenty of languages around the world that use characters which cannot be found within this range defined down here. For example, accented characters. If you were to go and write, for example, the word POK Emon with the accented E, this acute accented E is not to be found within this range. So if you were to try to use the alt code to spell this word, let me go back and try to actually draw this in the game. We are going to see that acute accented E is not going to be rendered correctly. It is going to use this like substitute character to tell us that there is a character missing from the font's range. And especially if you are planning on having the text in your game being written in a language which is not English, but also just in general. For example, some character names, some like player names, names of people might contain accented characters or other non-Latin characters, the ñ character in a lot of Spanish words or names. You will want to go and make sure that your font is defined to actually contain those characters. To do that, you can go into the font ranges UI over here, and you can add a particular, either a range of Unicode characters, for example, the default range like this, which is what comes with the font by default, or only the digits, or only the letters, or the entire ASCII range, which I believe does contain most of the accented characters that you might be concerned with here. You can add that range to your font, and now, when I go and run the game, make sure GameMaker saves before I do that. Now when I go and run the game, we will see that we now have access to the acute accented E character, and also all of the other characters which can be found within the within this ASCII character range. If you want to add a particular character which is not included in that range, you can type it. Let me actually delete this range first. So if you want to get rid of characters that you might have added by accident, or characters that you might have decided that you don't need, you can hit the delete range button over there. You can also just type in, what was the alt code? Alt 0233 for the acute accented E. You can also just type in the characters that you would like to display in this box down there, and that will add it. And now when I do this, we'll kind of have the opposite problem that I had a minute ago. And all of the characters that are not the acute accented E are going to be, like, blanked out. And only that character is going to be visible. That's kind of silly. Let me go and replace that real fast. That looks a little better. Anyway, so if you're dealing with, for example, like Cyrillic characters, which can't be found in the ASCII range, or if you're dealing with, for example, Asian characters, which can't be found in this character range, or Hindi characters, or Hebrew characters, that kind of thing, you will want to go and make sure that those character ranges are added, and the GameMaker recognizes them. Let's see. Options. There's a couple of other miscellaneous font options which you can set here, which I pretty much only, like, I pretty much never use any of these, but they are here if you're interested in some of the more advanced typography settings. So the particular font renderer that's used when rasterizing your fonts, whether or not to apply kerning, I can't imagine why you would ever want to disable this, but there's a couple of miscellaneous font settings which you can configure there. And I think that's about it. So the rabbit hole on fonts, as with many things in GameMaker, does keep going, and there are even more other advanced things that you can do with fonts, particularly when it comes to signed distance fields. But that should, I think, cover all the basic stuff that someone just getting started with GameMaker might want to know. And I think I am going to end it off here. So, let's see. My name is Michael. I like Wizards and Dragons and making games. I like to post videos on all kinds of stuff you can do in GameMaker, so if anything like this appeals to you, feel free to subscribe. I like to post videos on both beginner stuff and also more weird advanced stuff. I have a Patreon, so if you'd like to contribute to the channel, links to that can be found in all the usual places, and if you felt like pledging, I definitely would appreciate it. You should all go check out Wizarducks and the Lost Hat, which is one of the games that I like to work on when I'm not doing YouTube stuff. Link to the Steam page can be found down below. I hope you all found this useful, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Zenjamin, Zach Robinson, Squarecrow, Spydie Games, Pixelated Pope, Paradox, Nykotic, Manta Ray, GameMaker, GameArt Indie, Edward Holt, DJ Gibbles, Bokeh Dev, and Argo the Knot for supporting these videos. If you want to join their ranks and contribute to the channel, head on over to the Patreon page down in the video description to join the fun.